So we have a mixed audience here. We have graduate students and we have alumni. So I have to serve up a little bit for each. So you're going to hear about some nostalgia and some lessons and some ideas and some history, and hopefully each one of you will have a little morsel to enjoy as we go along. This particular presentation is the first of a series of presentations that will be coming along leading up to the 40th anniversary of the Internet celebration that we're going to hold here on October 29th. And you'll see a few more of these things which basically build up the interest and the momentum for that event. So let's talk about an auspicious title, My Work in My Life. The outline, so you'll get a flavor of what's going to go on. We're going to talk about my journey, the things that influenced me. This is for the graduate students and for the grandchildren of the alumni. And my childhood and the things that affected me, as I say, things that mattered accidentally and things that I didn't recognize at the time were important, and they were. And you need to recognize those milestones as you go along, because they do matter. The opportunities that were afforded me, opportunities you have right now here at this university, the barriers and what to do about them and how you can overcome them. Some of my research work, there'll be a few equations. Again, this is for graduate students. A few words about the Internet. Throughout, you'll hear some of the lessons. I'll articulate them. And finally, I'm going to basically scold you a little bit with an admonishment. OK, so the early days. My parents were from Poland. My father was a grocer. I was born in Harlem, right there. A place called Sydenham Hospital doesn't exist anymore. I grew up a little further north in Washington Heights, which was the drug capital of Manhattan for many years. Now it's improving. I won't tell you which direction. I went to a great public school, the famous PS XXX. This was PS 173. New York City had a terrific elementary school system, and there were a lot of smart kids, and that was important because it pushes you to do things that are important. I learned street smarts and whatever else you learn in the streets early on, and that's been an important part for me as well. What did I enjoy as a kid? Gadgets of all kinds, building model airplanes, games and sports, and comic books. And it turns out that the comic book was a very important turning point in my life. It's turning point number one. Early in elementary school, I was reading a Superman comic book. It wasn't that one, but that's the one I could find on the web. And in the centerfold was a description of how to build a crystal radio. And it wasn't that picture, but that captures what I wanted to show. It involved a number of parts and some description, but the picture mattered more than anything. And I found that I could probably build this for nothing. And you notice it doesn't even have a battery, if those of you recognize what these symbols mean, which means it really would be free, well, sort of. For example, this crystal detector I could build out of my father's razor blade and an old pencil lead. I needed a toilet paper roll to wind some wire around for the inductor. I needed a headphone, which I stole from the local candy store telephone booth. You could unscrew them in those days, and they were lousy, but it was good enough. And then there was this funny thing called a variable capacitor. And I knew I couldn't find that in the streets, but I knew where to get it. I knew downtown and Cortlandt Street and Canal Street, all the radio shops were there, and you could probably find one down there. So my mother took me in the subway downtown, and I walked up to the first store I could find, and I proudly walked in and I said, "I want a variable capacitor." And the guy said, "What size?" I had no idea. So it blew my cover. I told him what I was trying to do, and he sold me exactly the right part. It looked very much like that, just a few cents, wired it up, and it worked. I could hear music coming out of the air. And that totally enchanted me. I wanted to understand what that was about, and I spent the rest of my life trying to figure out how that works. It's still a mystery in some sense. But it doesn't have to. It sucks it out of the air. It's a very soft phone. Actually, the phone was the problem. The phone was the problem, but it needed no batteries at all. It just took the EM out of the air and drove that baby. You know, that was a great inductor, by the way. If you ever build a Tesla coil, you get the same effect.
High impedance, a few milliwatts?
It was a few milliwatts. It was low impedance. That was the problem.
Microwatts.
Yeah, just need a mic. And it really was inferior. But I could hear the music if you listened hard.
I did it too.
It's see? How many people have ever built a crystal radio here? I see a lot of young faces. I love it. That's great. Okay, they're wonderful. So I was destined at that point to be.
They have kids now, that's why.
They have kids, okay.
Kids.
Oh, kits. Yeah, don't ever build a crystal radio with a kit. That's not fair. Yes.
Where are we going to get our experience doing this kind of thing when radio's all digital?
No, you're absolutely right. You are right. Same with an automobile, with an electronic carburetor. How do you figure anything? It's really hard. And the kids these days, they're not experimenting with a lot of physical things, except the computers offer them an opportunity to get their hands dirty and pull things apart and put things together. Because missing that physical handling, it'll come back later, is a very important step in understanding. It's all about the intuition, you know, ingesting what's going on, understanding it. Okay, so going on. So as a kid, I started reading all about radio electronics, everything I got my hands on. This was one of the books I used, Elements of Radio. There was actually Marcus and Horton, and also Marcus and Horton. It was a great book. It had a lot of pictures. It talked about electrons moving and heating up filaments and boiling electrons off. It was physically meaningful to me. And there was a lot of mathematics in there which I didn't understand, but enough so I could learn about electronics. And I spent my early youth cannibalizing radios. I'd find things like this, and I'd tear them apart, and I'd rebuild them. And my cousin's husband took over a TV store with a lot of old radios in the back. I gave them all to me, and I was just tearing these things up all the time, and just building in the corner of the living room we had in my little apartment, all the stuff hidden behind the sofa. And a related lesson here is that my father wasn't home very much. He was working. And my mom never stopped me from doing this. It was a mess, you know, with soldering iron and wires. And you know, these things don't look pretty to begin with. And when you take them apart and put them together, they look even worse. And she let me do it. She had no idea what I was doing, but she let me do it. And that's really important, that freedom. I would go down to Cortlandt Street needing some parts. And often you'd find a box of vacuum tubes like that. And there'd be a sign on it that said, vacuum tubes, a nickel apiece. Guaranteed to light. And they lit, and that's about all they would do. They wouldn't necessarily rectify or amplify. And I had no meters. I couldn't afford any meters. So I had, you know, it was constant experimentation. Anyway, that was fun. So there I was. I was admitted to Bronx Science a little bit later. That was a very important step. Meeting kids who were really involved with science, really smart kids, kids that would drive hard. We also had the head of the Harlem gang and the South Bronx gang at Bronx Science, smart guys, a mix of interesting people. It was a growing experience, but you know, high school is important for everybody. I joined the Boy Scouts early on, as soon as I could, and I started climbing the ranks, and I became a Star and a Life Scout. And at that point, my Scoutmaster said to me, he challenged me that I could become the first Eagle Scout in this troop. And that was a challenge that looked really hard and worthwhile, so I took it on. And in fact, I did become an Eagle Scout. And that's probably the most prized medal or certificate or achievement I've ever done. Because it was the first one. And it was hard. And I believed I could do it. And I accomplished it. So it was a turning point. And in fact, it's lesson number one. Believe you can achieve. Don't belittle yourself. Don't underestimate yourself. You can do great things. You got to try. You got to set the goal a little bit beyond what you can reach for, and you'll expand to accomplish it. So, I was a lifeguard just before going into college, and I was all set to attend CCNY, which is, guess what, back in Harlem again, right over there. So my life revolved around Harlem, it seems. The environment, is lesson number two, is the environment in which you grow up matters a lot. as I told you, in the case of my mom, she encouraged me to experiment, didn't get in my way, didn't ask, didn't help, but didn't get in the way. And this is very important. You don't have to have science in your family background to be successful in science and engineering. Some of you may feel that if your classmates have a background through their parents or siblings in science, they have an advantage. They don't. In fact, sometimes having a clear playing field makes it easier for you. You don't have to be better than your parents or your siblings. And sometimes having a cluttered playing field, which means scientists all around you in your family life, can get in your way and direct you in the wrong way or set goals that are not appropriate for you. So it's important to recognize the environment matters, and don't feel that however weak your background is in terms of environment, that you're at a disadvantage. And you know, what I'm describing here in this presentation, I'm sure is repeated by so many of the students here. We have such an international mix, people coming from all walks of life. You must all have gone through bits and pieces of this, and so I'm really preaching to the choir. So, college. So I was set to go to college in 1951, but years before my father had fallen ill, and I had to work from there on in a variety of jobs, these are some of them. And the tuition, it's, yes, Ailey.
Before you go to college, when was the point, if there was a point, that you realized you're special?
Special? Just ask my mother. She told me. No, it's true. Everybody has a mother, and you're special to them. I thought you were going to ask, when did I realize I wanted to be a scientist?
When you realize you have the capacity to research, or to do beyond what the average is doing?
The time when I realized I could do research specifically was as a graduate student, not before. The time I realized I could reach and achieve stuff was that Eagle Scout. But I fought being a scientist early on. I was worried about going to Bronx Science for fear I'd be channeled into science, and I wanted to keep my options open, lots of other things. So when I got to Bronx Science, the first course I took was a course in social studies. I felt, this is more general. And the teacher said, we're going to teach social studies using the scientific method. And it blew my mind. Turned out it was okay. It was okay. So anyway, college. So getting ready. Tuition at City College was $12 a semester. $12 a semester. And I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford it because I had to bring money into the house instead of just not costing anything. So I had to attend the evening session. I took a full-time job in electronics, a daytime job. And as a result, I was thrown into a group of driven students, misfits, weird people, trying to fit college into a work schedule, at the same time working in an environment with guys who just come out of World War II. And you really learn things fast when you're working with these GIs. So, and the instructors were different. They were not the ones from the day. They were ones who were working also in the daytime, teaching at night, and they really knew what was going on. For example, I remember very specifically one instructor came in and started teaching us about this thing called a transistor, germanium transistors. And he said, these things are better thermometers than they are amplifiers because they were so heat sensitive. You never learn that from a daytime professor out of the academic books. But it's very valuable. We had gangs running around City College at night, throwing water and rocks and things at us, and people blowing smoke into your very expensive laboratory experiments, making you think you had ruined the equipment. And these World War II GIs were really fantastic people with stories and experience in the Signal Corps. It was a rather mixed environment. It wasn't a standard kind of environment.
You have siblings?
Did I have siblings? Yes, I have a sister. She's older than I am. She's a psychotherapist. Nothing to do with science. No, I'm not going to talk about my sister.
Was there any influence?
We fought all the time. Yeah.
Beyond that.
No, that was the important part. I hit her over the head with a hammer when I was 3. So, three stitches, she keeps reminding me. What's it? Older. 2.5 years older, yeah. Enough of my sister. Okay. I got married when I was age 20 in undergraduate school, off to MIT. So, one day while I was working, I was told at City College someone was coming from MIT Lincoln Laboratory to describe this wonderful fellowship program. And I took off at 4 o'clock, went to listen to the lecture. The guy described this fantastic scholarship. You pay for everything, send you as a student, work in Lincoln Labs, what could be better? All paid for. And he said, if you want an application, see the professor in the back after I finish my presentation. So I went back afterwards, and I asked for an application, and the professor said, who are you? And I told him my name. He says, I don't recognize you. I said, oh, well, I go to evening session. He says, evening session, get out of here, no application. His name was, I don't know if I should tell you, his name was Pistrang, an appropriate name for a guy like that. Anyway, I wrote away, got the application, I got accepted, which was very good, because it was a great system. It was a turning point number 4, if you will. Lesson number 1 again, believe you can achieve, don't take no for an answer, reach, and you'll get. So I went to MIT Lincoln Laboratory and MIT as well, and I went there in January. The first person I worked for at Lincoln Laboratory that summer was a guy named Ken Olson. He's the fellow who formed Digital Equipment Corporation. He was working at Lincoln at the time, and he had me building some small, a variable pulse delay amplifier, so you can dial up a delay and the pulse will come out that long later. And then he said, I'm going to form this company. Would you like to join me? And I said, no, I have to get my graduate degrees. And he went off and formed Digital Equipment Corporation. And the first thing he saw was a little thing I built for him. He started selling parts and modules before he started selling computers. Never regretted that, but it was nice to see somebody who went on to that kind of success. So, MIT, here I am. I did really well at City College. I was first in the class and day and evening. I was student body president of the evening. Get to MIT, wise guy kid from New York, okay? And I'm surrounded by these really smart guys and gals. I mean, they were the cream of the crop. And I was told by my advisor that one course I should take was being taught by a fellow named Murray Barnes, who had written a book on linear systems analysis. By the way, it was Gardner and Barnes. Barnes taught here. Gardner was at MIT, and he was teaching this course. And I was told it would behoove you to do well in this course. This is the course that separates the men from the boys. Take the course, take the midterm. I got a 50. A 50! I'd never seen anything south of 90. 50. I couldn't believe it. So I went back to the instructor and I squeezed 20 more points out of him. But 70? This is totally unacceptable. And it was a wake-up call. So, lesson number 3 is a wake-up call can be very important. I realized that my study habits and the time I put into preparing at City College was not enough for this environment. And I got an A in the course, but I got to tell you, it made me rethink. I used to study, on the subway, was how I studied at City College. That's all the time I had. This was serious stuff. And it changed, it hurt, but it had a really beneficial effect. Okay. So when I finished my master's degree at MIT, I was encouraged to continue on for a PhD on the same program, which sent me through the master's degree. And I really didn't want to do it, but they pushed and they pushed. I said, okay, I'll do it. In fact, my My first child was born the summer when I was finishing the master's. It was all scheduled. And then suddenly I got a kid and I'm going back to school again. So as many of you are probably involved with right now. So I never planned to do that. So they encouraged me to. Lesson number 4 is unanticipated choices are going to come your way. Keep your eyes open, evaluate them. Don't stick to a particular path if something comes along that may be meaningful to you. You know, life is not rigid and preordained. So I figured if I'm going to go for a PhD and spend another few years at this, and by the way, one of my classmates is in the audience right now at Lassiter. We were students, starving students at MIT at the time. You don't lose touch with these guys, by the way, although Ed and I did a little bit, but here we are again. I decided if I'm going to study and spend more years at this, I'm going to really reach far. I'm going to work for the absolutely best professor I could find at MIT, and his name was Claude Shannon. Now, how many of you know the name Claude Shannon? That's around half. So shame on the rest of you. This guy is one of the most he's the most brilliant person I ever met. And he was fantastic, and that's what he looked like. just a wonderful guy. He created information theory and coding theory and a lot of the things. He coined the word bit for binary digit. His master's thesis was to take advantage of Boolean algebra and apply it to the mathematics of computers. Master's thesis. He worked at Bell Labs. Just a brilliant guy. I won't go into all of his accomplishments, but his capability was both strong, excellent mathematical intuition and physical intuition. He could look at a problem and think through, what the issues were, identify what the solution would be, and then understand the intuition and the implications and the physics of it all. And yet his work created one of the most mathematical of the engineering disciplines, information theory. You read those transactions and you can't make head or tail out of it if you're not familiar with the stuff. Brilliant guy, but he could also ride a unicycle. He could juggle. He would lecture and flipping a chalk in his hand, never watching it, always catching it. And he couldn't do multiplication very well. If he had two numbers to multiply, he'd do a long multiplication on the blackboard. So his excellence was in systems and understanding things. Anyway, I started working on a chess playing program with him, and it was very successful. Became the MIT chess playing program. But I needed a PhD dissertation. And I was looked around at my classmates under his tutelage, and they were all doing work in the area that he had developed, information theory and coding theory. And it was really the thing to do at MIT at the time. The problem is that Shannon had done the foundational work. He had done the important stuff. What was left was both hard and probably not of great significance. So I said, look, here I am investing my time to do some more research. I want to do something more dramatic. So I decided I want to find a problem that's not so well developed and so well mined, and hopefully had more potential. Now, I was surrounded by computers at MIT and at Lincoln Lab, and I recognized sooner or later they're going to have to talk to each other. And the technology that existed at the time was woefully inadequate to do that. It was terribly inefficient, too slow, too cumbersome, no protocols to operate, etc. So I said, this is perfect because it's wide open. It needs to be done. Nobody else is really working on this. So I jumped in. And lesson number 5, don't follow the pack. Don't necessarily follow the pack. If they're running from a fire, follow the pack. But stake out new territory. Don't be afraid. There's plenty of frontier around. Even today, most people think the frontiers are gone. There's plenty out there, and I'll talk about that later. Trust that you can succeed. And your first, and this is the answer to your question, Ellie, your first good piece of work is the important one. Until you break through and do something new, you probably will lack the confidence and you can achieve that. Once you get a new result or a contribution, that should give you, if you will, the confidence to repeat that and generate many more successes. It could be anything. It could be research, an essay, a work of art, a business challenge, something significant to you. And typically the timeline of a graduate student, this is accomplishment versus time. It looks like this, okay? And every so often a little poke, but doesn't catch, little poke. And then one day, it takes off. Trouble is you don't know where you are on this line, right? Okay, and that's where you have to have the confidence. It's okay to be struggling. Recognize there will come a time that you'll be able to break out and do something that will mean something to you. Okay, and that's an example of the first success that I had that was meaningful to me in terms of being able to achieve. So, what did I do at MIT and UCLA? A quick summary is in '59, when I became a PhD student, I set out to uncover the principles of data networks. In '61, I published a PhD proposal, and I laid out the model for modern data networking. In '62, I introduced the idea of packet switching and analyzed it. Filed a PhD dissertation. MIT and McGraw-Hill published it as a book. '63 came out here, UCLA. All throughout the '60s, the telecom industry didn't give a damn about this. It was a new technology, but they didn't want it. They said it wouldn't work, and they said even if it did work, we want nothing to do with it. All right? Big mistake on their part. In '66, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense got interested. I'll go through that with you in just a moment. '69 plus, the network locomotive started its wild ride. In '69, the internet began here. And we know a lot of that history. I'll take you through a little bit of it in just a moment, very quick history. So, some details. That was my thesis proposal. It was accepted in July but filed in May. The title was Information Flow in Large Communication Nets. Now I'm showing you that title because already you can see the influence of my professors. Shannon's information theory was based on the law of large numbers, taking things to the limit of a large number of things interacting where averages matter. And I said, if I'm going to build a communication net, I want to think about a very large one where some emergent phenomena will begin to appear instead of just 5, 10 node networks where you can't see things happening. Really large networks. And as a result, if you're going to make it large, you have to make it scalable and reliable and robust, and you can't have centralized control. You need distributed control. So all the principles that came out were derived because I was influenced by Shannon in going after limits of large numbers where things actually begin to expose themselves. Okay. This is actually the statement of the problem, and then there you'll see things like I was looking to investigate information flow in large networks. This was the model, had nodes, links, there was sort, store, transmit, enter, leave, time lapse between initiation and reception, so notion of delay and buffering. Channel capacity was important, storage capacity, routing doctrine was important, queuing disciplines, when does it jam up, what's your transient behavior. These are the kinds of questions I was raising based on the model of this kind of a system. So early on, this particular picture appeared in, this is actually a picture out of my dissertation, but the model was there in an earlier paper you'll see in a moment. And the idea was to have messages coming in here and chop them up into little pieces, send one piece here, send it back here, chop again, next piece, next piece, next piece, next piece. Meanwhile, other packets could be coming along here from other messages. So the idea of packet switching and packetizing was articulated here, and here was the analysis back in April '62 of exactly how that system would behave in terms of the response time, showing that small messages are treated better this way. Very important, because one of the key problems in data networks was that a big message in front of you may delay a short message, and that's a bad idea. Packet switching allows them to, the fast ones to get to quickly, even if you don't know which the little ones are, because they'll all lie. You say, how big are you? I'm little. It's a lie, but this allows you to find out which one. Okay, so the result out of dissertation is I set up the model. I use queuing theory, introduced the idea of queuing theory as the right technology. I put in independence assumption I'll tell you about in just a moment. Evaluated performance, developed design procedures, optimizing how much capacity, where to put it, what the routing procedure, and what message sizes would matter. Distributed adaptive routing, and as I say, looked at packet switching shown as efficient, fair, robust, etc. So now the equation, there's a couple of equations here. This is for the graduate students, okay? There's a key equation for networks that came out of this. Here's a network, and let's assume it takes, on average, so many seconds to pass a message through a network. Average network delay. And it turns out, if you want, that's a number you'd like to find. How long does it take a message to go through a network? And it turns out to be given exactly by that equation, where lambda I is the traffic on the ith channel in messages per second, and gamma is the throughput in messages per second passing through the network, and ti is the average delay on this channel. That's what this is. And the trouble is you can get all those things except that. How do you find that term? That was the big problem. Turns out it's really hard. Really, really hard. We still can't do that today. Okay, in fact, you could do it in some very special cases. It took a student out of Holland 13 years to solve it for a 2-node case, and even that was under very special conditions. So I had to make an assumption. This is where the engineering side meets the mathematical side, and it's called the independence assumption. It says each time a message hits a new node, its length is randomly chosen again. It's an absolutely false assumption, right? But is it a good assumption? Does it matter in terms of the performance? I was able to show it was an excellent assumption. It didn't affect the overall message delay. So without that assumption, problem's intractable. With it, it's trivial. So if you do that, you find an exact expression for that missing term, where that term happens to be the channel capacity. And the response time looks like that. And that's the exact result. But it turns out you can get even simpler than that and say that is this very simple two-parameter model for delay. Namely, the delay in the network as a function of the throughput looks extremely good everywhere until you hit that point, and then it gets terrible. So it's good or it's bad. And that's a moderate approximation to this picture. And you can show, actually, that it's a very good approximation. Things actually do look that sharp. So that two parameters, the no-load delay and the network throughput. And those kinds of ideas stick in your head. So when you're dealing with networks, you can get some physical feel as to what matters. So this is a little more detailed. The general optimization problem was to minimize this delay over all the parameters you have in the network. Where should you put the capacity? How should you route messages? What should be discipline? What should be topology? Subject to a fixed cost constraint, whatever the heck that means. You don't really care about that. But the point is you can solve that, exactly. You can solve it when DI equals 1. That's the cost for capacity on a line. You can solve for arbitrary cost of capacity. And as a result of getting an exact result under the optimization, it tells you something about what kinds of topologies are good, what kinds of routing procedures are good, what kinds of message sizes, etc. And more than that, the thing I was looking for was, what do you learn from all this? What emerges as principles you can keep in your head? And there were some principles. The idea of demand access, or if you will, resource sharing. Overall, the average demand is what matters in these simple calculations. Only assign resources to a data when it's present. Don't wait until something arrives, but use it if you have something else that can use it. And examples that take advantage of things called message switching, the packet switching we know, polling. Let me back up a little bit. There is a long list of things which achieve this fundamental principle. Packet switching is just one way to achieve that. Now, most people think that the internet success is because of a thing called packet switching. That's only one way it could have been done. The principle is this, that you want to share things on a demand basis as they arrive. There was an economy of scale in networks, which is shown in this chart. If you compare delay, throughput, and efficiency, sort of the key parameters of a network, you can either have fixed delay while you improve the throughput and the efficiency, or you can have fixed efficiency while you improve these two, or believe it or not, you can improve all three simultaneously. Something that the queuing theorists didn't believe and never cared about, because they just want the equations and not the understanding. But this is a very powerful capability to be able to improve everything if you manage the parameters in the right way. So again, a very important principle. And third was that distributed control actually works, and it's fault tolerant and robust and all the rest. Okay. So getting back to my life as opposed to the results here, had a great job at MIT. At Lincoln Lab, my own office, research, good people, good money. But I decided to take a job, a place far across the country in California, low-paying professorship. It was about half the salary I was making. Admittedly, 9 months was $7,500 for 9 months.
Good weather.
Good weather, but far from family. You know, far from family. There's songs about that, right? In those days, crossing the country was a big deal. Okay. But I found that I loved everything about being a professor. And here's just some of the things. I could write a whole paper on the joys of being a professor. You know, if you like teaching, it's great. You should like teaching. You shouldn't be a professor. I mean, think about it. Research, working with graduate students. You don't have a boss, no matter what. You don't have a boss in university. You decide to do research on anything you want. When you want, you work as hard as you want. The harder you work, the better it is. The best people in the world come to the university to give lectures. You get to meet them. You go travel. I mean, it's a great job. Except there's no jobs around these days. Okay. Lesson number 6. And this is very important. Select something in life that you really enjoy doing. They'll never pay you enough to do something you don't like. Life is too short. Don't compromise on this one. You'll never get paid enough to do something you don't enjoy. Now, these are tough times, and it's harder these days, but you got to keep that in mind. You know, don't accept something where you're unhappy and you're going to spend 40 years of your life waiting for 5 o'clock or summer or weekends, whatever. Okay. So getting to the internet story now. 1969, it was a really special year. Okay, put the first man on the moon. Woodstock Festival took place. People were running around in New York State doing funny things, looking funny. The Mets won the World Series, an event with probability 0. Happened. There's a probability lesson here. Charles Manson went on a killing spree here in this city. And by the way, the internet was born. And nobody noticed. No. People noticed all this stuff, but probably this last one had more impact than any of the others. You can measure it different ways, but it really probably had more impact in the long run. So, lesson number 7. You can't always recognize that what you're working on is important. Sometimes you can, or you usually can't tell the impact. So treat everything you do as important and special, and do it well. Don't be sloppy. Do it as well as you can. So, let's talk about the internet. I have an ophthalmologist. His name is Larry Garwood. And his father once asked him, what is the internet? It's a good question. And Larry had a great answer. He answered, it's everything, past, present, and future. Now, his father had been in World War II in the Canadian Navy. He was commanding a landing craft, an assault landing craft. And his father was a pretty savvy guy, but he was ignorant of the internet, and he was a little skeptical. So he said to Larry, okay, son, I was in Canadian Navy. I commanded this craft, LCA 13, Landing Craft Assault 1375. You go find that on your internet. This is 50 years later. So Larry searched around, and he went on the web, and he looked around, and he had real trouble. He couldn't find anything. Finally, he went to the Naval Maritime Museum in Canada, probed into their archives over the net, and he began to find some interesting things, like he found a picture of his father's ship. That's the ship on which the landing craft was housed. In fact, it had just come around the Straits of Gibraltar, and it was going to participate in something called Dragoon, which is an invasion of Europe during World War II. It was supposed to be ahead of Normandy, but the weather was bad, so it got delayed. They finally did attack. But this ship hit a sea mine in the Mediterranean, blew a hole in the hull. They stuffed it with a lifeboat and took it to one of the Greek ports to repair it. And it took a few weeks. And so the sailors got bored. And they said, let's go visit the port of Piraeus, the port of Athens. So they got in their landing craft. These are landing craft with no weapons. The weapons are carried by the landing troops, okay? No weapons. And they approach Piraeus. Okay, here they are. Now, the Germans were occupying the city. Okay? And these guys had no weapons. So they're coming over the horizon, a few of them, about 3 or 4 of these craft. The Germans see this, and they knew Dragoon was going to occur, and they panicked. So they blew up the factories and evacuated. Lucky for these guys. And the citizenry came out and said, you have liberated us. And so they hopped on the landing craft and started cavorting with the sailors. And guess what? That's his father's landing craft. He found the sailor. And guess what? That's his father. Okay, that's the internet. It's got all of it there. You just got to go and be lucky enough and find it. Okay. So thinking more about the internet, here's some words I want you to comment on. Ethics, trust, open, free, shared. That was the culture that we had in the very early internet. That's the way we thought about it. We trusted everybody that was on the early internet. Everything was shared, open. There was no financial motivation. It was all gratification for doing a good job. Jerry Esther, and you were there. You remember that environment, as some of the other faculty here and alumni. It was a time for doing good things, solving a problem, making it all happen. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. We can't trust everybody on the internet, so we'll go through that. What makes it tick? Well, it's the people. On the one hand, they contribute the ideas, and it's the culture whereby the power is shared by everyone. And it creates communities of people who want to share things, ideas, questions, experiences, etc. And it's changed a lot of fundamentals. For example, it's removed the barrier of distance, how far you can reach, how many people you can interact with, how fast you can do it. It increases anonymity, which is part of the dark side of the internet, by the way. The cost is minimal, if not zero, and how much you can get. I mean, it's removed all these almost fundamental barriers of physics. There's other kinds of barriers removed. Political barriers, economic, social, cultural, racial, physical handicaps, physical appearance. You can be short, fat, and greasy, and look as powerful on the internet as a really, movie actor. or whatever. That's Mickey Krieger, right. And many of you probably have seen this cartoon, but if you haven't, it's a New Yorker cartoon from some years ago. It's wonderful. It says a big dog talking to a little dog. And the big dog says to the little dog, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And it's a deep message in that, by the way. Very deep message. And that's part of the problem we have in terms of some of the spam and viruses and dark side of the net. Okay. There's no way back. The young generation can't conceive of a time when there's no net, when they couldn't share their photos, talk, stream video, shop online. We can't ever go back. That's out of the bag. Won't ever be able to go back. And its future, well, it's going to be us and circumstances that shape it, economic as well as others. Its future will surely provide these things. We can predict this. A lot of mobility, mass personalization. That's not an oxymoron. It's accurate. Video addiction, location-based services, and most of all, surprising applications. Almost all of the surprising applications nobody predicted. Started with email, then the web, then YouTube, then Napster, peer-to-peer. I mean, on and on. Nobody predicted them. They came out and they grew enormously and quickly. So we can predict that you can't predict. Okay. And lots of societal and lifestyle changes. Everybody today knows about the internet. My 6-year-old granddaughter knows about it. My 99-year-old mother knew about it. It's penetrating every aspect of our lives, all aspects, as I said. This is times of great change, great opportunity for the younger folks in this audience. And whatever you do, it's going to reflect the changes I'm describing up here. And as I say, it would behoove you to embrace them, understand them, and exploit them, if you will. So, let's think about what's been happening now. Some of you have seen me ask this question. I'm going to ask you, who made this prediction? And I'll read it to you. It will be possible for a businessman in New York to dictate instructions and have them instantly appear and type at his office in London or elsewhere. He'll be able to call up from his desk and talk to any telephone subscriber on the globe. An inexpensive instrument, not bigger than a watch, will enable its bearer to hear anywhere on sea or land, music or song, the speech of a political leader, the address of an eminent man of science, or the sermon of an eloquent clergyman. Look at that language. Nobody talks this way anymore, right? Delivered in some other place, however distant. In the same manner, any picture, character, drawing, or print can be transferred from one to another place. Now, if you haven't seen this before, does anybody know who said this? Miloš. Yes, you would know because he's from Serbia. But he did, no, they're very important. He did his work in the United States. Nikola Tesla, that guy, and he said it 101 years ago. It sounds like he's talking about the internet. And all the vision is there. You know, a few pieces are missing, but it's all there. So, young whippersnappers, you know, these ideas have been going around for a long time. We keep inventing these things and think we've invented them, and often we have not. So let's talk about wireless communications, for which Tesla was so well known. Maxwell had a few things to say. Maxwell, the great mathematician who predicted radio waves from the mathematics. Look what he said. Mathematicians will even be doubtful whether the ideas as expressed in symbols have ever quite found their way out of the equations into their minds. Remember Shannon's concept. You have to understand what you're talking about. It's got to be in your guts, in your intuition, or you don't own it. The mathematics on paper doesn't do anything until you understand what it's trying to tell you. One of the great mathematicians of our time. Hertz, the fellow who discovered radio waves, what did he say? He said, I do not think the wireless waves of discovery will have any practical application. Nikola Tesla, he had other things to say. Basically, he said, equations don't matter. They have no relation to reality. And he was not the mathematician per se. He was the hands-on guy. He was going to move the axis of the Earth, and he was going to send power via radio waves, which is now currently being considered 100 years ago. Brilliant man. And if you want to hear more about him, I'm sure that Professor Etchegovich will be happy to tell you about him. This guy was, you ought to read it. There's lots of biographies on Tesla, worthwhile reading. Guglielmo Marconi, the man usually credited did with the invention of radio, although this guy had more to do with it than this guy. And what did Marconi say? He said, have I done the world good or have I added a menace? Anticipating the dark side of these technologies. Brilliant foresight. So, radio. The experiments, the researchers were Maxwell in Scotland, Hertz in Germany, Tesla, Serbia, and the United States. Popov in Russia, Lodge in England, Bose in India, and Marconi did his main experiment in England. It was a multi-continental effort. All these ideas were emerging around the same time. It was in the air. It was a kind of synchronicity, if you will. Collective synchronicity, independently created across several continents. It was in the air, it was going to happen, and these people were the names associated with it happening. So if you look at the internet, brief history of the internet, before the beginning, in 1957, Sputnik was launched. That was the beginning, okay? In 58, President Eisenhower said, that'll never happen to us again. We got caught with our pants down. So we created the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, and started funding research. The early role of ARPA I'm going to describe right now. In 1962, Licklider from MIT and both Baranek and Newman joined ARPA and created the computer group within ARPA and started funding research in the area. And he had already was articulating ideas of something called a galactic network. He imagined what could happen if we had a network and people were connected and there'd be a thing called man-computer symbiosis. He had all these wonderful thoughts as what could happen. He had no idea how to do it. He didn't realize that the technology was already developed by the time he started thinking about this. But we got together and we all made it happen simultaneously. In '64, Ivan Sutherland, a classmate of ours at MIT, became the second director of ARPA, the computer group. And he tried to establish a 3-node network right here at UCLA. We had 3 mainframe IBM machines, one for the campus, one in the School of Health, and one in the engineering school, I believe. And it didn't happen. 3-node network was all laid out there, ready to go. Didn't happen for political reasons. Nobody would give up access to their machines on campus. Took years later. In '65, Larry Roberts, also a classmate of mine at MIT, got an ARPA contract, and he and Tom Merrill tried to send a dial-up data connection across the United States. It was horrible. They succeeded. It was enormously frustrating. There were no protocols, no error control, no flow control. It took forever to do. And he realized this was something that needed fixing. Meanwhile, Bob Taylor now succeeded Sutherland as director. And he recognized we need some kind of a network to share resources. Let's put all these computers into one network. If you want to use the machine at Utah for its special graphics capability, log onto that machine through the network. You don't have to have graphics on every machine. So basically, he decided to connect the computers. He brought Roberts in to manage it and make it happen. And we're going to get back to that story in a moment. ARPA is moving along now saying, we need a network. And here's the reasons. Meanwhile, as ARPA grew, over this period, from '58 on, there were 3 threads, basically, a synchronicity, again, just like in the radio field, of generating the underpinnings of the internet technology. The 3 of them were the following: myself at MIT, in that period, Paul Barron at Rand, just down the road, in that period, and Donald Davies, who coined the word packet in England in that period. And basically laying out the ideas of what this network should look like and what the packet switching technology should be. So these merging threads of inquiry the 3 of us were basically unaware of each other's work. It happened again almost simultaneously, developing the concept of what should be the underlying technology of this network. And we promoted the idea of packet networks. I told you nobody cared, especially AT&T. Okay. But ARPA was now poised to take this technology, matched against their need for a network, and bring them together. And so that's exactly what happened. ARPA steps in. Licklider already described as galactic network. The concepts were already laid out by some of us. Sutherland tried to fund the small network, failed, but the idea was in the air. Taylor saw the need for a network. Roberts arrived to build the damn thing. And so it happened. And he basically says he would never have tried it if he didn't have the underlying concepts that proved that packets wouldn't fall on the floor, that the buffering would work. Okay. So in 1969, it looked like this. That says Sigma 7. This is UCLA in 69. We had this host computer here running a time-shared service right here in the computer science department. And we connected that box, which was the first piece of the internet, called an interface message processor, which had been specified by a group of us and implemented by a company in Cambridge, Mass. Called Both Baranek and Newman. They put together this switch. It was the first packet switch. It's down the hall around the corner. You can see it. The same number 1 is still there. That was the first piece of internet equipment attached to the outside world. That's what it looks like. There's a close-up of the front panel. That's the inside. Remember that ugly radio that I cannibalized? It's so ugly, it's beautiful. Okay, it's just you have to love this machine. So, in October '69, a second node was put together at SRI. Here they had a DEC 940, and they put an IMP there, and that was the first piece of the backbone internet ever. It was a 50 kilobit per second line between UCLA and SRI. In '69, we put out a press release, and basically I'm quoted in that as saying these things are going to happen. Okay, there's going to be computer utilities, which are like web-based services. It's going to be invisible, like electric telephone. It's going to be everywhere, individual homes and offices. This is 2 months before the first switch came on. And we decided to keep a log of all this. So there's a log we kept. You can tell right now it's an engineering project, right? And it was this fella, John Postel, who made us keep a log. It started in October of '69. In September, the IMP arrived. In October, we started keeping records. And he has some lovely quotes in this log saying things like, please write more clearly. We can't read your entry. Please record what you're doing. You know, he was disciplining us to keep good records. But there is a particularly important entry in that log. And that log, by the way, is around the whole corner also. It says on October 29th, 1969, at 10:30 in the evening, Charlie Klein put this entry in there. It says, talked to SRI host to host. That is a record of the first message ever on the internet. Okay, Charlie and I were there, and we decided we're going to send a message from our time-shared machine here to the time-shared machine there, with the first message across here. So the question now is, what was that first message? Okay. I'm sure everybody knows what it is, don't you? And if you don't, shame on you second time today. Was it something good, like What Hath God Wrought? Samuel Morse? Or Watson, come here, I need you, just spilled some acid from his battery? Alexander Graham Bell? Or One Giant Leap for Mankind? Now, these guys knew what they were doing. Okay? They had an understanding of media and public relations and longevity and history. And they prepared these messages. Well, maybe Bell didn't. He spilled the acid. But and they were ready. And there were cameras. And there were photographs. And there were media there. We weren't that smart. All we wanted to do was log in from UCLA to SRI. And to log in, you got to type LOG. And the remote machine will type the IN for you because it knows what you're doing. So we got ready. There we are. Same setup. There's Charlie. There's Bill Duval. Telephone connection between the two. Make sure it's working, right? So Charlie sent the L, and we said, you get the L? And he said, yep, got the L. We sent the O. Did you get the O? Yep, got the O. Sent the G. You get the G? Crash. Now, it wasn't this imp or that line or our host. It was their host. It had nothing to do with the network. They had a memory overflow, so they crashed. So the first message ever on the internet was, low. Now, we couldn't have planned that any better. That is about the best, most prophetic message, shortest you could imagine. So everybody will say in the future, boy, did they plan a good message. But that's what it was. Okay. Lesson number 7. Again, repeating. You can't tell when important things are happening. We didn't have a photographer. We didn't have a recording. We had no notes of that. The only entry was in that log. Nobody was there, just a couple of us in the room doing this thing. Do the best you can. It may pay off. Okay. So growth of the internet. From 69 to 88, yes, Lola?
I can't believe you didn't think that was great.
No, we didn't think it was great, really.
Done something.
Nah, it was a little tiny. The whole network was going to be, you know, maybe 20, 30 nodes big. We were going to prove a technology. And it got away from us. No, we really didn't anticipate how important that was. We would have had a camera. Or a tape recording or something. Anyway, from 69, somebody's asking a question? Yes, Edna. Oh, I have to stop talking for a minute. I can't stop talking for a minute. So let me tell you a story instead. This is a rather interesting story. It seems as though a young man and the more senior person were at a football game, and the young guy said to the older person, he said, you know, there's no way you can understand me. He says, when you were growing up, there was no radio, no airplanes, no internet, no advanced technology, no web. You just have, you can't possibly relate to me and understand. And the older fellow said, you know, son, you're right. We didn't have those things. So we had to invent them. What the hell are you going to do? Next generation. Because the fact is, it's always been the case throughout history that the young generation does not recognize or do their research about what happened in the past and see, in fact, a lot of this is repeat in a different format. But you have to acknowledge the things that happened in the past and do your literature search. So, 69 to 88, the network grew. And that particular date is important because it grew rapidly, friendly, broadly, until, in 1988, Robert Morris unleashed the first internet worm. And we said, uh-oh, something funny's going on here. And then we said, don't worry about it. Big mistake. So from 88 to 94, it continued to grow. Dot-coms came online. Backbone went to gigabit speeds, thanks to Al Gore, by the way. Thanks to Al Gore. Don't laugh. Largely his influence in Congress. He had the first President Bush sign the High Performance Computing and Communications Act of '91 is the last act that the first President Bush signed and launched a lot of the cooperation. Web began to roll out. So these are the things that were going on until 1994. Cantor and Siegel introduced spam. We said, uh-oh, and we said, ouch. And we recognized this was a bad thing. The spam came out. It surfaced as a widely publicized event until April '94. And these Arizona-based attorneys, they were the most hated individuals on the net. Lawrence Cantor and Martha Siegel, the green card lawyers, they spammed the internet. They basically were offering to help people who needed a green card get them because it was going to be a lottery. It was a time limit. You had to apply and come to them, and they'll help you get this thing. And then the advertisement on the net, on our net. You don't advertise on the internet. You're not allowed then. So we said, you shouldn't do that. We sent email back. Stop. Don't. Take it off. Bad. We sent so much email back, we cooked their server and created the first denial of service attack accidentally. Anyway, it was massive mailing, highly visible. And there it is. That's what the first email message looked like. April 12th, 1994. Come, hurry up, get it. You know, you qualify. Some people don't qualify. Deadline, free information, come to us. Okay. By the way, it turns out that there was a spam mail years before that out of Digital Equipment Corporation. It wasn't widely spread, though. It was advertising the introduction of a new machine, but it didn't have this kind of publicity. Anyway, spam was out. So if you look at how the hosts have grown over the years, I'm showing you here the year the first time we had that many hosts. So in '69, we had one host, UCLA. And on a log scale, you notice it's growing exponentially. And it's always been growing exponentially. Always. And it will continue to until we populate the world. So who brought all this to us? Well, here's some of the early wireless personalities. Now, if you look at the internet personalities, there's the early pioneers. There's the implementers. There's Steve, by the way. The value adders, the launchers, and finally, as of late, the billionaires. Okay? And you know, time is running down the page, and that's important. It took decades and decades before the exploitation in the financial way took place on the internet. But that's the history, and that's what it was. So a few words about mobility and being everywhere. What do we mean by mobility? It means no matter where you are, when you're there, who you are, which means are you a parent, a student, a professional, whatever. If you can connect, you can seamlessly interact, anyone, any device, any service, in any fashion. We can be everywhere without being there. So mobility is a very strong component of the kinds of internet we're seeing today. The disruptive forces we're seeing, everything's getting digitized, broadband's emerging, even the government's going to help pay for some of this in the rural areas. Devices are getting smaller and smarter and fast. Applications are just charging out. It's a wonderful arena right now. The new services we're seeing, ringback tones. How many of you have spent 99 cents or so for a ringback tone on your cell phone? Come on, you're young folks. I can understand the alumni, but stolen. How many of you stole a ringtone? 1, 2. Okay. Well, music streaming. Okay. Important application. Full song downloads, videos, full videos, gaming, gambling, sports. Every one of those is a multi-billion-dollar industry today. Ringtones, a few years ago, $5 billion and growing. So there's lots and lots of applications out there that are generating basically a way to monetize the internet. Where did we go from here? As I told you before, we're going to see convergence of all of these on devices and applications and function. Changes in the way people work, live, play. I told you about that before. A future with, and I mentioned this, a lot of mobility, mass personalization, video addiction, location-based, surprising applications, societal changes. The infrastructure, a lot of this is easy to predict. What's hard are the applications. So the internet's going to be a pervasive global nervous system with all the sensor networks and the mobility and the access. But the apps are very hard to predict. In fact, we can't predict them. And so we can say no one's in charge, it's the Wild West, and surprising applications will continue to surprise us for sure. So don't forget, as we rush forward, okay, remember where this came from. Most youngsters today can't think of a time when there was no internet. They can't imagine their parents belonged to this era. Remember the football game story. Don't underestimate the seniors. And here's a kind of sad thought. A lot of the young people feel, well, it's all been done. How can they contribute now? You know, all the good work. Shannon did all the good work. Okay? No, it's not true. Lesson number 8 is, don't make the mistake of thinking those golden days are gone. They're here. There's plenty of frontiers. There's plenty of opportunity to create. Just look around. Find the empty spaces. You could have great impact if you do something reasonable. It's times of enormous change and therefore enormous opportunity. Just have to keep your mind open. Don't get discouraged thinking that, you know, the people before you did it all. It's not the case. So now I'm going to basically yell at you a little bit. I have 5 golden rule guidelines for research. This is for the graduate students again. Conduct a 100-year test. What is that? Well, who knows who that man is? Let's hear. Dick Hamming, right. Brilliant guy. He gave a lecture in March of '86 called You and Your Research. And he said, well, how come so few scientists make contributions that are not remembered for many, many years? And his answer was, they don't work on important things. This is some of those lessons I gave you before. Work on things that you think are important. If you don't do important work, if you don't work on important problems, you're not going to do important work. So he created this test. He once said to me, what progress of today will be remembered 1,000 years from now? Think about that. What about today will be remembered 1,000 years from now? It's hard to imagine what it would be, but Hammond had an answer. He said, it probably will be the Hamming code. And he may be right, by the way. It was wonderful. But anyway, I ask you, choose 100 years. Will your work be remembered 100 years from today? 10 years. You know, think about what you're doing, and will there be an impact? Will there be something worthwhile remembering? So besides the 100-year test, the second rule I have is don't fall in love with your mathematical model. The mathematics is nice, but be willing to yield on the model, change it, adjust it, approximate it to get the result you need to answer the question at hand. Beware of mindless simulation. This is especially important for this audience. Here's some simulation curves I pulled out of the literature. You see something like that, y on an x-axis, and they say, look, that's the way the system behaves. Or they'll give you this, 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 or they'll give you this. That's the way it behaves. What do you mean that's the way it behaves? What if I change this number? What'll happen? So if you see something like this, and by the way, this happens to be one of my own curves, okay? You have to ask questions like, ask the obvious questions. What is the meaning of the slope with that line? What underlying parameters determine the slope? Why did it start here? What is the meaning of the asymptote? Why is the breakpoint here? And is there something meaningful about that? If you can't answer that analytically, not with the numbers, but with the underlying parameters, the throughput, the response time, the buffer size, the number of users, then you don't understand what's going on. And too often we see papers that just present these results and say, here, problem done. Model, simulation, conclusion, publish. It's not enough. And unfortunately, the computers made it too easy to generate these things without any understanding. So beside those three is another one. Understand your own results. When you get a result, sit down and think about it. Ask it, what is it trying to tell me? Remember what Maxwell had to say, what Shannon had to say. Ask what the physical intuition is. You know, I always gave closed book exams, and my students always hated it. You didn't. You liked it. Good. Because they said, well, what if I forgot the magic formula in part A? I can't get part B, C, D, E. I said, don't worry. You want the answer to part A? I'll sell it to you. It's worth 2 points here. I'll give you the answer, 2 points. So you can continue. Because if it's not up here, if it's in the paper or in the computer and not up here, you can't think with it. If you can't think with it, you can't use it to generate your intuition, your understanding, formulating new problems, etc. Anyway. Okay. And also, most discoveries are not accompanied with the word eureka. It's more like, that's funny. And probe it. Find out why it's funny. It's not necessarily an error. It's probably exposing a phenomenon you don't understand, and it's worthwhile understanding it. So, more on modeling. Move with the frontier is tough. We do mislead all the students because there's a graduate course you come to and you study information theory or networking or logic or some protocol, TCP, and we give it all to you and say, here it is, look, bing, 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 bing. And we're going through years of deep thinking and present it to you like it was a piece of cake. And then when you get to the frontier, you can't budge it easily. And we fool our students into thinking that it's easy to budge. Okay? So we mislead our students to think it's too easy. Also, as I've told you before, typically you don't do anything until you take off. So once you succeed, you'll be able to do it again. And most students don't believe that. They say, gee, they don't have the confidence to believe they can make a difference, they can do something worthwhile. This is part of the golden rules again. Understand your results. You can usually generalize something when you see how simple it is. If it's very complex, it's hard to imagine how you can generalize something so complex. Look for the underlying simplicity of a problem, and that will allow you to step forward. And look around related areas to the ones you're working in. It's the areas in the empty spaces where something's likely to happen, the interdisciplinary areas. So, concluding thoughts. The pioneering days of the early internet, it was a golden age. It allowed us the freedom to think big, take risks. In those days of wonder, if you will, and innovation, we were given the opportunities to do this kind of thing because we were encouraged by research funding for high risk, high payoff, long-term funding and horizon, strong funding, open problems, little management, not a lot of progress reports or site visits. This was a wonderful environment. This is an environment in which many of the innovations you've seen today came about. Unfortunately, that's changed. Okay? Research these days is characterized just the opposite. Low risk, low payoff, short-term funding, weak funding, application focus as opposed to fundamental thinking focus, heavy-handed management. And this is the way some of our funding agents have been providing funding. which many of the faculty in the research universities have had no choice but to participate in. And so they take this money with that kind of characteristic, in the short term, very application, told what to do, told how to do it, short horizon, can't take risk. And that's the way they support the graduate students. The graduate students see that that's the way to do research, and that's the crime. Because those graduate students will become the faculty of tomorrow, and they'll teach their students the same wrong way. So it's multi-generational impact until we can get out of this box. Somehow we've got to get, and maybe our new administration will help bring this about, with some reasonable approach. We've got to encourage the innovation and big thinking. We've got to get these three groups, industry, government, academia, to work together and find and fund ways to foster that vision. Cards are being reshuffled. Why don't you deal yourself a winning hand in this global poker game? So we've come a long way. Or have we? Thank you very much.